introduce ourselves first.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I think.
Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Busara Center for Behavioral Economics Associate Recruitment Drive webinar. My name is Ariana Keeman. I'm a senior associate at the Busara Center, and I'll let my colleagues introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, my name is Gideon To. I'm also an associate at the Busara Center.
Hi, I'm Mark. I'm also an associate and I'm the most recent member of the team.
Hi, I'm David. I'm an associate as well and I've been here for about 9 months now.
So how we'll structure this is first I'll give you a quick introduction and a brief overview of the role. From there we'll talk a bit more about the recruitment process and timelines and answer any questions that you may have already sent in around that. From there we'll go into more specific questions that we've received from you guys, which have been really helpful, and then give you a bit of an overview of how to contact us in case there are any further questions. So from there, just to give you a brief introduction of the Busara Center first. Many of you may already know about us and what kind of work we do, about our history, etc. But we were founded as a behavioral economics experimental research lab. In 2012, 2013, we were founded first under the auspices of Innovations for Poverty Action. We were founded by Professor Johannes Haushofer, who's an economist and a neuroscientist right now based at Princeton University. And from there, we initially started as a place, an incubator, where we were able to provide experimental economists, development economists, behavioral economists, a platform and a place to be able to run experimental behavioral studies on a sample population that is not weird, so to speak. This is an acronym we very much like to use and we find sort of cute and clever, but WEIRD stands for Western Educated, Industrialized, Rich Democracies. The idea being that most of the experimental behavioral literature so far has been based off of studies that have used as subjects individuals from universities, undergraduate students, etc., from the Western world. And therefore, assumptions about how people behave that are based off of this experimental literature don't hold true for most people in the world, but particularly not when applied to development, programming, product design, etc. Anyway, so we started as an experimental lab. We were a lab that continued to grow quickly once we were founded, due to a lot of interest by researchers for the first year or two. Since 2014, also over the last 2.5 years, we've expanded our work and we've been quickly growing in our advisory work. So our advisory work is now sort of what we do more often than any other types of project, where we use our expertise and our infrastructure in conducting experimental behavioral studies in our lab, as well as in the field, and use it and use these methods and our expertise to be able to answer questions from the real world for advisory clients. So advisory clients would include large donor organizations, funds such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the World Bank, etc. It could include private sector actors, so private companies, small social enterprises, or the nonprofit world, obviously, NGOs, etc., where typically an issue would be that a program, a product, a policy that's been developed by any of these organizations will not be garnering the type of behavioral response that we're hoping to see, meaning maybe there will be issues around adoption, comprehension of a certain development program or product in a way that would inhibit the success of the program, and then they would reach out to us and we would work with them to be able to sort of devise evidence-based solutions to any given problem they have. So based off of that, the associate role, and this, I promise this time will be brief, the associate role is really sort of the heartthrob of the Busara Center. The associate position is such that as associates in this room, I can all sort of give you individualized examples the next hour and a half. But we are first and foremost project managers, so we take over sort of all client management, client development work, as well as project implementation management. So that means team management on the ground. But we also have a very heavy role, especially for advisory projects, on content and experimental design development. as well. We're also responsible for thinking about sort of larger questions as we continue to grow in terms of organizational development, in terms of international expansion as well. Yeah, it's a really fun role. It's a very crucial role to the Busara Center, and we're really excited to welcome a few new team members, hopefully starting at the beginning of next year.
Yeah. So thanks, Ariana, for the introduction. So we had asked you to send in questions before the sessions that we can basically run through and try and hit as many as possible. So essentially answer all the questions you have about the role, about your expectations and whatnot. But before I get to that, I think I'll just want to briefly talk about the process, the recruitment process at Busara for associates. So right now we're receiving applications. Some of you have already sent in applications, some are yet to, but the deadline is this Wednesday, October 26th, end of day East Africa time. So please try and get those applications in. If you have any questions about how to do that, you can email the email address provided there. So after the application process closes, we'll be reviewing the questions the 4 questions that are part of the application process, just generally trying to get a sense of how you approach problems, how you think, and just generally get to know who you are beyond just your resume. We'll also be looking at your resume, and then we will score those two different parts of the application together, and then after that process, which will take about 2 weeks, we'll inform each one of you whether or not you're moving to the next stage. The next stage will be a written task. So essentially, we'll be providing you with a prompt, asking you to in the form of a proposal or otherwise, we'll communicate this to you. Essentially, we want to see how you would structure a project, how you organize a project at Busara. We'll provide information on how to reach us for clarifications on that. So after the written tasks, we'll also provide you with a data task, trying to just assess your data analysis skills, just where your strengths lie, where your weaknesses lie. Just to reiterate, the recruitment process looks at the whole individual, the whole candidate, and we recognize the fact that there's some people who will be much better on the data task and others will be much better on the written tasks. But essentially, we're looking for candidates who are very flexible and adaptable to different situations. So even if you're not very good at data task, you should just give it your all. If you're not good at the written task, you should give it your all, and then we have a system that we'll use to grade both of these tasks. So after these 2 tasks, we'll also be communicating to you whether or not you've moved on to the next stage. The next stage will be the associate interviews, where you will be via Skype or in person. You'll be interviewed by current associates, Busara associates. So this will be a much longer. We'll get a chance to meet you in person or over Skype, and then we'll be able to you can ask questions at that point. You can get clarifications about Busara, but more importantly, we will get to know who you are, whether you're a good fit for Busara, and you'll get to know whether Busara is a good fit for you. And so after the associate interviews, we'll finally go to the director interviews, where we'll be meeting with the Busara directors, and the structure will be similar to the associate interviews, but now you'll get a chance to meet and talk to the leadership, and they can answer your questions, and then they can also try and assess who you are. And so after that point, the director interviews, then we'll be providing the final offers to the successful candidates. So that's just a brief 5-minute overview of the process that we're looking at over the next 10 weeks or so. So in terms of timeline, like I mentioned, we expect the new class of associates to start sometime in January. So essentially that means by early December, you'll be informed, the successful candidates will be informed of our decision, and then we'll start the onboarding process after that. So we'll now go into the questions part. So some of you have sent in questions since last week, and so essentially what the format is, one of us will just go through one of your questions and answer that, but also provide context around that and any other questions. But just to add, if you have any other further questions after this session, feel free to email me. I provided my email address, which is gideon.to, just gideon.too@busaracenter.org. And I'll be glad to answer your questions, especially before the application deadline closes on Wednesday, the 26th. So we can start with, someone asked, who are Busara's main clients?
Okay, so I'll take this one. So I don't think we have a main client per se. What typically happens with advisory projects is that we will be dealing with a small organization within Kenya, and the project will typically be funded by an international organization, so people like the World Bank, the Gates Foundation. In terms of main clients and which sectors of Kenya we work in, it would be financial inclusion, health, and agricultural work at the minute. And then in terms of the academic work, and David's maybe better to advise on this, who we deal with is just determined by our discussions. So if someone reaches out for Harvard and they have an interest in studying, interest Busara, and we think we could run it, then we run it with them. In terms of people we've worked with before, you can go on the website and you can see the published papers.
Great. So related to that, someone asked, what are examples of current ongoing projects at Busara?
I'll take that one. So maybe I'll just start off with a couple of projects that I'm involved in that are all fairly distinct from each other, so it could give you a good example of the kind of diversity of projects that we run here. So one project that I'm working on actually with Mark here as well is a project that's being funded by the World Bank and some others to understand savings behaviors in Tanzania, and in that vein understand what kind of interventions, what kind of design elements within digital money products could be useful in order to encourage people to, encourage people to use digital money products to save more. Because one thing that we see now is that many people are active mobile money users, but they don't use mobile money for anything other than transactions or to keep sort of money for short periods of time and not for savings. So in that vein, that would be an idea of an advisory client where the World Bank and the Financial Inclusion Department, particularly in the World Bank, are interested in understanding how people make savings decisions and whether mobile money at all could be a good medium through which to encourage savings within Tanzania, and primarily within rural society in central and northern Tanzania. So that's one example of a project. Another example of a project would be maybe another example of a project that I'm working on is based actually in Uganda. This project is also an advisory project, but is on a very different topic area. It's on civic engagement, where we have been working with 6 separate civil society organizations that all work on trying to encourage civic engagement around environmental issues in Uganda, and working within their programs and their communication programs in particular, their advocacy programs, to find out what types of experiments, what type of behavioral insights could be used to then structure easy sort of experiments to do both impact evaluation of their communications on key aspects of civic engagement that they're interested in, as well as to generally sort of cultivate a culture of evaluation of work and also understanding the target population for these particular organizations. So those would be 2 different types of advisory projects, where, as you can see from both of them, that what we mean by consulting projects or advisory projects at Busara very much tend to be these large-scale projects where we work with diverse partners and typically are funded by a third-party donor organization that would have sort of a specific strategic interest, perhaps, in funding a certain type of work in the region right now. On the other hand, we do a lot of research project implementation. So an example of that would be that, for example, right now we're working with some researchers from Harvard on implementing a midterm evaluation for a large DFID-funded initiative around humanitarian capacity building. So in this scenario, the design of the study, the design of the evaluation isn't necessarily led by us. We're doing more implementation side of it, but our role very much is to be the people on the ground who know the context, who understand sort of how we would go about running sort of a large field impact evaluation, including a lot of humanitarian organizations and charities in Kenya, as well as to be able to provide a bit more expertise in survey design, again, from more of a behavioral perspective as well. For an example of what that would mean would be like knowing what the ordering effects of questions are and knowing when to sort of correct for things like this, knowing sort of whether questions will garner a certain type of bias in the respondent or not, based on our expertise again in Kenya, etc. So those would be sort of an example of projects that we run at Busara right now. I don't know if, David, you want to touch on maybe one or two lab projects as well?
Yeah, so that's what I was thinking. I was just jumping to giving some examples on lab projects. So we run a bunch of lab projects for different professors around the world. Currently, we're working on this really large study that has to do with stress and how stress affects different psychological and economic indicators. And that's a whole agenda in itself. So we're doing several stress measures and trying to see how they affect different indicators. We also, with Kenya's election coming closer, we also have a lot of ethnic preference studies coming in that seek to see if there's in-group, out-group bias that is exaggerated in the presence of elections and things like that. So that's sort of like a taste of what our lab does, but we also run very varied experiments across for different professors and across themes and across domains, in fact. So do you want me to go on to the next question? There's some other questions that were being asked was what is the rough split between research and advisory projects? So roughly that would be around a 50-50%. And somebody asked about the number of lab projects and number of field projects that we're doing. Research projects tend to be more seasonal in nature and they sort of follow the academic calendar. At the moment, we have around 44 projects, out of which 15 are field, 9 are lab, and the remaining 20 are advisory projects.
So someone else asked, how long would be the duration of the associate contract? Like what type of contract would an associate be receiving?
I'll take that. We require at least a minimum 2-year commitment typically from our associates. And this, I mean, obviously there's not anything like too like hard about that. Like we don't punish anyone who doesn't stay for 2 years or anything like that. But we do require soft commitment to at least 2 years. Again, because we're a fast-growing organization and continuity within, especially senior staffing structure tends to be very important. But so far we've seen associates stay for a minimum of a year and longer as well. But again, because we're very new, we haven't been around to have any associates around for longer than 2 years anyway.
So someone else asked, I don't have a master's degree. How will that affect my chances of getting hired at Busara as an associate? So we indicated that having a master's degree is not a requirement, but it's a preference. So whoever sent this question, if you don't have a master's degree, the equivalent of that, which is few years of experience, would be ideal for this job because it's a fairly senior role. You'll be responsible for several members. You each be responsible for a project, and that requires a bit more experience that can be attained through school, extra years of schooling or a few years of experience. So this shouldn't deter anyone who does not have a master's degree from applying, especially if you have a few years of experience through internships, through 1 or 2 roles that you've had after graduating from undergrad. So this shouldn't deter anyone, and this shouldn't worry anyone. But we do prefer someone who's had a few more years of schooling experience. So someone asked what are the specific start dates and what's the general timeline. So I touched on this earlier on, just to reiterate. We expect the new class of associates to start sometime end of January, and essentially that means the successful candidates will be informed sometime early December. Just to clarify on that. Yeah. And so,
I take this. So another question in the same vein as the question I answered earlier is this a long-term permanent role, or is it offered as a short-term contract? It is a long-term permanent role. As I mentioned earlier, we do require soft commitment of 2 years from the associates that we hire. We sponsor a work visa in Kenya, and it's in that vein, it's a permanent role. Yeah.
Okay, so the next question was about whether we focus on behavioural science or just behavioural science for the purpose of poverty alleviation. So I think the answer differs with the research work and the advisory work. So for the research work, that's somewhat almost entirely determined by the demand from academics. So, David was talking about we're looking at ethnic preferences. I mean, that might be related to poverty alleviation, but it's not directly relevant. In the advisory work, if I were to guess, I'd say roughly 80% have a direct link to poverty alleviation, and then some which might have an indirect link to poverty alleviation. But if you're interested in doing behavioural science, I think there's plenty of work within poverty alleviation that you'll find really interesting. I think that's probably my answer.
yeah, and just to add on to that, we do have a diverse group of partners that we work with that are interested in poverty alleviation. Some that it might not be as clear as others. So especially we do work with a lot of, for the advisory side, we work with a lot of organizations in the financial sector. So from first glance, you wouldn't necessarily be able to see how that is a poverty alleviating project. But then the way we choose to engage with our clients in the financial industry is we work on projects that ultimately the end goal is financial inclusion. So we're very careful about how we engage and how we select clients that we work with. But essentially, poverty alleviation is like a big blanket that covers most of our projects, and it's a very important and core part of Busara's ethics and Busara's ethos and general just philosophy. Yeah. So another question someone asked was, how many projects do associates manage on average? So this answer varies, and we can all chip in, but essentially it really depends on the size of the projects that you have. So we do have some projects that require 2 or 3 associates working on that, and that's essentially a big project. We have other projects that have only 1 associate staffed, and so what determines the number of projects 1 associate is handed or takes up is just boils down to the size of the project, the length of each project. So for instance, on average, you tend to see associates work on about 4 projects at a given time. Working on 4 projects doesn't mean that everything is live and at its peak at any given moment. So you might have some projects that have like 2 or 3 weeks where there's data collection going on, and so it's quite slow from the associate's perspective, and then it picks up when the data comes in and there's a lot of analysis that requires to be done. Other projects might be at the initial stages where you're creating a timeline for the project, you're designing the experiment. So it depends on the load of on the size of the project, and also which part of the timeline a project is. So I don't know if you guys have anything to add on that. Yeah. Okay. So I got this question from a lot of you, which is, what is it like to work in Nairobi and to live in Kenya? So I think each one of us can provide our different perspectives on that. David, why don't you start? What is it like to work in Nairobi?
I think it's fun. Sorry? Okay. It's fun. It's a very... so for me, it was not too different because I moved here from India, and it's sort of similar to India in a lot of ways. Food-wise, it's sort of similar, but not really similar. But it's fun. I think it's fun. And especially for people who are interested in research and in the lab, I'm sorry I'm moving away from living in Kenya, but one thing that is that I sort of love about the lab, and that is really interesting to work in a context like this, is how different behavioral mechanisms work different in different cultures. For instance, like just to give you one quick example from the lab, is that the idea of chance or probability here is really, and with the demographic that we work with, which is low income, low education populations, the idea of chance does not work in the same way. The idea of probabilities does not work in the same way as it would in, say, a US university. So it's really interesting and it's really challenging in how do you adapt concepts to be consistent with our population. So I think that's the most fun part.
So I think he's probably answered what it's like to work here, so I'll answer what it's like to live here. So I'd say Nairobi's a pretty awesome place to live. The most things you can do fairly cheaply. I mean, you can escape in a bus for $1 at the weekends and be in the middle of mountains hiking. If you're into club scene, Nairobi has a great social life. It's just a pretty fun city to live in.
So my perspective, out of the international staff who's here, Gideon is from Kenya, so I'm the one person who's been here, I suppose the longest. I've been here for about 1.5 years. And I've been fortunate enough to be able to travel a lot within Kenya, as well as in the region through work, as well as run work in Nairobi. And I would say that I've worked in Uganda, Tanzania, and Kenya, and I would say that Kenya is the most fun place to work out of these 3 countries, primarily because it's been, at least in my experience, that people tend to be very, very enthusiastic, good-humored, very entrepreneurial, and sort of very creative problem solvers. I'm not going to sugarcoat it by saying that working in Kenya is necessarily very easy. Running especially field projects with a lot of logistics and a lot of partners and a lot of moving pieces involved can become difficult from time to time. But the people that I've worked with here and the type of projects I've been able to run here and the type of partners I've been able to work with here have been fantastic, and I've found most of the work I've done so far extremely rewarding. And I think a lot of that has to do with living in really just a great country to work in, and especially do this type of work in. That's also ties into the fact that there's a lot of innovation and a lot of money actually in East Africa, but particularly in Kenya, to fund creativity, innovation, etc. So you end up meeting a lot of people who are here not because they, are on holiday or they are here to work from some NGO for a month or whatever, but you have a lot of people who are here for a wide variety of reasons, and in fact a lot of people who will move here because Nairobi is one of the world hubs for like this, especially social entrepreneurship type innovation, I guess, perspective on a work, on a career or sort of the economy in East Africa. So it's really cool. You get to meet a lot of really cool people. As Mark mentioned, the social life is really fun in Nairobi. One of the best parts of living in Nairobi, though, is the fact that you can get to just the most stunning, unbelievable places so easily. The coast of Kenya is absolutely beautiful, and it's a very cheap flight away or a bus ride away. Hiking's great. So I've really enjoyed my time both working and living here. And I think I would speak for most people that I know here as well in saying so.
And just, so I was born and raised here. I'm a local, but just one thing I'd like to add, and something that I found that's really awesome about being an associate at Busara, is there's a very good mix of locals and non-locals. And what ends up happening is, because we work a lot, Busara is a highly collaborative space, especially among the associate team. So you end up naturally becoming very close friends with your fellow associates, and this spills over into the weekends and into the holidays, where you get to spend, get to hang out a lot after work, get to hang out over the weekends. So I think just the way Busara, the associate team, has been structured, really facilitates this bond between different associates, and yeah, it's not surprising that one weekend I'll go with Ariana and David and Mark to go visit my parents in a different part of the country, and they can get to just like be away from Nairobi. But just to reiterate what Ariana said, the good thing about Nairobi is it can only take you like 30 minutes out of the city to just be in the wilderness, a beautiful place where you can go and unwind and relax, especially lovers of nature. Nairobi would be a great place. I know Mark likes to go hiking every weekend. So yeah, there are a lot of options for you. But just to go back to what I said, associates, there's a very good mix between locals and foreigners, and that makes the social life at Busara outside work very, very healthy. Yeah. And just a quick one, someone just emailed me and asked me, how many associates are we planning to recruit for this cycle? And so that, to answer that, we don't have a definite number, but we have a range. So we're typically looking for between 3 and 6 associates. So that will be determined as the process goes on and our needs, but we're definitely recruiting at least 3. That's just a quick question someone asked me. So moving on, what are the travel requirements for this position? So I'd let Ariana, who's traveled the most, take this one.
I guess, well, it depends on what this person means by travel requirements. If the concern would be around residency and getting a work visa, as I mentioned earlier, the Busara Center sponsors international staff's work permit, so that's not a problem. Once you receive your work permit, which typically takes up to 6 months, but in the interim, you have these like sort of 3-month visas, etc. But anyway, once you do get your work permit, it allows you to sort of travel very easily to other countries in the East African community, which I found has been really helpful. I can go to Uganda without getting a visa, which is awesome. I can go to Rwanda without getting a visa as well. So the Busara Center at the moment is operational in a number of countries. We're headquartered in Kenya, of course, but we have projects that are active in Ethiopia, Tanzania, Uganda, and Nigeria. In each of the situations where you would have to go to one of these countries and acquire a business visa or some sort of work permit, the Busara Center will sponsor and arrange for those requirements as well. So I hope that answers the question for travel requirements.
Yeah. And just related to that, Ariana, if you can touch on this, someone mentioned that they have a long-term partner that would be interested in moving to Kenya with them. So how would Busara facilitate that? Would they be able to sponsor?
I sent him a response.
Okay, but you can just
Okay, so the issue with Kenya is Kenya doesn't recognise partnerships outside marriage. So if you're married, then you can come in on a Busara could sponsor a visa for your wife to come in. However, she wouldn't be allowed to earn in the country. If she wanted a job, she'd require a separate visa. For couples who are not married, then again the other person would have to come in on a separate visa. However, we could confirm later in the recruitment stage. If there was a fantastic candidate, maybe we could speak to operations and see what the possibility of sponsoring was.
Just also perhaps a helpful anecdote is one of our colleagues had this arrangement where she moved to Kenya for the associate role at Busara. She has a long-term partner, and he came with her. And when he arrived, he didn't have a job, but he very quickly got a job that he finds very enjoyable and fulfilling. He was able to obtain a work permit through his workplace very easily as such as well. So it's not a case that if you have a partner you can't come or whatever, it won't work out. That particular person can feel free to reach back out to Mark or myself, and I can put you in touch with Clara, who's our particular colleague who went through that process. So there's a precedent for it, I'll say.
Okay, so the training process. So I might not be the best person to answer this, and I missed some of the training because of my masters. So I can tell you my experience, and then they can correct me. So you have an intense 2 weeks where you spend roughly about 6 hours of the day doing training of the sort of 8 to 9 hours you'll be in the office, and that covers all the key skills you need to hear and outlines, who does what job in Busara. Thereafter, you're then moving into sort of a full-time role. However, we have training on probably every week there's something you could go to develop skills. So we have a thing called Lunch and Learn, where let's say you're an expert on, designing implicit association tests, then you can run a one hour 90-minute seminar and people can come along, and if you want you can set homework. Some people do, others don't. So the formal training is 2 weeks, and then there's training throughout the year. And you can also build time into your week to just train. So let's say you have a big data analysis task from a client, you can go teach yourself machine learning on Busara's time. That's perfectly okay. The training for this year, I'm not sure how it's going to look. I don't think it's finalised. I think it'll probably be a bit more formal training to start with, but you guys can jump in if there's anything else.
Yeah. So just like Mark mentioned, usually when you come in, there's an intense 2 weeks that there are different sessions that current associates and the directors go through based on their interests and based on their experiences. So they touch on every part of an associate's experience at Busara. And we recognize that that's a lot to take in during the first 2 weeks, but then subsequently after training, the first 2 weeks training are done. Usually the way Busara's model is sort of you learn on the job, because so what we're looking for when we're recruiting, we're looking for someone who's very quick to learn, someone who's very willing to solve a problem, and that really translates into your self-training. So if you put on a project, for instance, your experimental design skills are not where you would want them to be, but you need to do a very good job on a project, then typically what happens is an associate would go and talk to, say, David, who's experienced in a certain area, and then work on their skills while doing their project. So essentially, like I mentioned earlier, it's a collaborative space where if I do not know something, I don't just say I don't know it, I go ask someone who does. So when we recruit, we make sure that we have every single skill required by an associate represented in the team. So if you ever have a question, you go to David, or Mark, or Ariana, or even the directors who regularly have office hours that you can just stop by and discuss something that's challenging you, and by so doing, you're learning. It's part of your learning. So learning never stops at Busara.
And maybe just a brief note to add on to that is the associate role is it's probably the most intensive and deep and also rewarding learning experiences I've ever gone through. Meaning there's a lot of things that go into the associate role. There's the advisory piece, which requires knowing how to manage clients, knowing how to develop business, knowing how to make pitches, knowing how to be able to convey complex technical information in a digestible manner, in a way that's creative and visual. There's the aspect of project management, team management, knowing how to work in unfamiliar places, even if you're like Gideon works in Nigeria, so it's not just a matter of like being a foreigner to Kenya either, because we do work in a bunch of different countries. There's also the data analysis piece of it, both qualitative and quantitative research methods, etc. All to say, there's a lot of stuff that goes into this role. Training is something that's really important for us, but as Gideon mentioned, I think sometimes what happens with our candidates is they feel like they can't apply, or there won't be they don't have the type of skills needed for the associate role because they don't know how to do X, Y, or Z. I can promise you that not one person has come into this role knowing even like 10% of what you end up learning, even within the first 3 months of being here. So the main issue with training is not about whether you get trained here or not. You do get trained, but it's more about being someone who is open to learning a lot, learning intensely, learning quickly, and being really enthusiastic and good-humored in the process. I think that's what the real thing we look for in our associates are.
Yeah, just one thing to add. So we actually get given a budget of $500 a year for personal skill development. So one colleague used it to go to a conference in Germany on behavioural science. Other people have used it to go to different conferences. If you wanted to do an online course in R or Stata, again, you can use it for that. If you wanted to buy books in experimental design. So obviously, as a consultant here, your hours are billed. So the training you do within Busara costs, and that's absolutely fine. And in addition to that, you have this $500 you can actually just go out and spend. But just to back up Ariana's point, so when you see the specification requirements, there are a lot of different skills you need to come in. Now, we're not expecting you to be good in every one. Like, for example, I know nothing about qualitative analysis, and I'll quite happily put my hand up. And if I was in a project and the client wanted qualitative research done, I'd go speak to somebody else. I wouldn't try to do it myself. What we just need is a baseline and everything. For example, you know what qualitative analysis is, you know how to think about it, and then that you're willing to say you don't know and either teach yourself or go out and ask somebody for help. Yeah. Right, so the next one is about working hours, how much is spent on research management and data analysis. So I'm guessing by research management we're talking about project management. So again, I'm not the best person to answer this because I'm pretty new, so I'll answer about the data analysis and then somebody else can jump in about the research management. So how much data analysis you do depends largely on how good you are at it. So if you're not particularly strong at data analysis, you might only be handed a data analysis task when there's nobody else is available to do it. So you might spend very little of your week doing data analysis. However, if you like econometrics and you're very keen to do it, then what will happen is you'll get roped into projects just to analyse the data, and that way you could be spending 20 hours plus a week on data analysis, but what determines it is roughly your skill level. Everyone has to do a bit, but let's say you're not very strong in data analysis, what they might get you to do is, can you open a data set, can you clean it, can you relabel the variables, and then you pass it on to someone else who's better at econometrics, and they'll run the actual statistics. But I'll let somebody else talk about the project management stuff.
I think that, yeah, I wouldn't say that there's any like clear-cut percentage of, oh yeah, your time, 30% of your time is this versus that. It really depends on the project load. For example, probably most of August for me and September, so the last 2 months, was spent very heavily on project management because I had a couple of main projects that were all starting at the same time, which required a lot of sort of close management and a lot of just project-specific work on my end. But you know, previous to that, I was on one main project, and other than that, I was doing much more sort of business development work, client management work, partner management work, etc. And I wouldn't say that the role is such that your tasks are split between data analysis and research management or project management. The associate role very much is to as a manager of any project that you're on, is to manage the data analysis as well. That sometimes means the associate does it themselves, or if you're not very good at it, or if you need to improve on certain things, you can pass it on, as Marcus said, to someone else. But it kind of goes within the purview of project management anyway. And just depending on where you are in the project timeline, if you're at the beginning, if you're halfway through data collection, if you're in the analysis phase, that really will be what determines within your project management responsibilities how much of your time is spent on particular data analysis tasks or others. But as I mentioned, it's not also the case that you'll always doing project management. In fact, that's not as I just mentioned. There was a couple of months earlier on this year where I did mostly business development work.
Okay, so somebody asked about the application question on design and intervention. They said, are the costs of the intervention included in this amount or not? So that's an oversight by my part. Maybe I shouldn't put in a figure, but so I wrote the question, and all I really care about here is, can you come up with a really precise research question, and can you come up with an experimental design and plan, econometric plan or statistics plan to use the results from your experiment to answer the research question? So just ignore the costing. I think unless you're a PhD student or you're coming from doing this work, you'll have no idea how to cost up the experiment. So just focus on formulating a precise hypothesis, formulating a design which answers this hypothesis, and then giving us the plan of econometric or statistical analysis to use the results to answer your research question. That's all I really care about when I'm reading it.
And just to add on to that, the questions that the application questions are meant to just see your level of creativity, just sort of get your level of experience with this type of work, and just essentially how you think. So we're doing this at the beginning of the process, so we can get to sort of start forming an idea of who a candidate is, their strengths and their weaknesses. So even if you've never done a proposal before, you've never written a grant, you should still take a class at this question, take a stab at this question, and just let your creativity speak for you. You can do some research about this, but yeah, we'd just like to see how you would approach these questions, because these are questions that we typically see as associates at Busara.
Okay, so we finished a bit earlier than expected, so we can stay here for another 15 minutes, and if you just send Gideon an email, we'll answer them as they come in.
So I've been receiving a couple of questions, some questions since we started, and someone asked, how do projects get assigned to associates at Busara?
That's a good question because we're in the process of potentially changing how we've been doing it. So how we've been doing it so far is James Mansell, as you'll see on our website, is our managing director. He also acts as the sort of most direct supervisor for the associate team. And in that vein, and he generally has his eye out for all different projects and business development that's going on at Busara. So in that vein, he'll sort of keep tabs on who's on what project, along with our director of operations as well, and sort of solicit feedback on potential associates that he thinks would be interested in that project, who have the time or the bandwidth to work on an upcoming project, or who may have strategic sort of learning goals associated with working on that project. And sort of see what people think, and then assign people to projects accordingly. I should also say, actually, though, that perhaps the soliciting feedback from the associate, whether they want that project or not, may come a bit later in your tenure. Now that I'm thinking that, I didn't necessarily get all the projects I wanted to be on my first 3 to 6 months. Yeah. Anyway, all to say that James right now is the person who really sort of allocates projects to associates based off of criteria, again, around learning goals, around strategic sort of capacity building, and around people's expertise. We are perhaps changing that system where we're going to have a sort of middle management layer that works on the allocation of these things, and not just James, but that's still in the works.
Just to add on to what Mariana briefly mentioned, so when you come in, some associates would come into the role not necessarily having a deep interest in a particular field, and at that point, it's all about you. If you're open-minded, you're willing to learn, you'd be surprised that you'd be staffed on a project that you've always been interested in, in the environment and projects related to that, and a project comes up that has to do with education, and you pick it up and you find that you really enjoy that project. So essentially what I'm trying to say is come with a very open mind. We have a diverse set of projects at any given time, and whatever you're staffed on, be open-minded, take it and go with it. You will find that you learn a lot of things that you didn't know before that. But also related to that, we also encourage a culture of communication between the associates and the directors. So if you're very passionate about something, even in your first week, speak up. Even before you join Busara, send an email and just say, I'm very interested in this and this, because some of you might be coming from some fields, some industries where you're very passionate and you have a lot of experience there. So there's really not a single formula or structure to which associates get projects assigned to them, but just come in with an open mind. You'll be very surprised.
Sorry, I just had to get in, so I'd forgotten, but actually just before you join, James would send you an email saying, here are the different areas we work, so health, microinsurance, financial inclusion, agriculture, blah, blah, blah. And then there was a slider, it was just a Google form, and then you to rate your interest in the scale of 1 to 8. And that seems to be how I've been allocated in projects. But even if let's say you're not interested in financial inclusion, you get allocated in the financial inclusion project. Each quarter you write what's called a focus contract, which is what you want to develop this quarter. And then at the start of the project, you have an onboarding meeting where whoever's heading the project will say, all right, James, I see you want to improve your data analysis. So in this project, this is what you're going to do. So you might not be interested in financial inclusion, but you're really interested in econometrics, and they'll make sure that you get at least some work on that project that develops those skills. So hopefully, if you're not interested in the overall theme, you'll still find some of the work interesting. Do you have any questions?
Yeah. So we have a question. So we're very fortunate to be joined by one of our directors, Channing, who's in the room. And I think this question is very relevant for Channing. I think he will be able to speak to it. So
he's just been sitting quietly in a corner.
Someone asked about what the vision and future of Busara, what does it look like, the near future?
Why is Mark still on
With a
there?
40-second delay.
Oh, 40-second delay. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a good question. I think the future of Busara is one where one of the premier organizations that use behavioral science in pursuit of poverty alleviation more broadly. And I think Gideon spoke about how those directly intersect, but that's where I really see us honing in. I also see us being one of the best institutions at conducting research in low resource settings, such as lab in the field experiments, lab experiments, to some extent randomized control trials. And I also see it being driven a lot by the team of associates that end up creating what Busara is. The different people here, even in their short tenure, because we're a young organization, have pushed the organization in different ways. So going back to the question about what projects are you staffed on, a lot of times you're staffed on projects that you create. So either it's winning a big proposal, whether it's reaching out to a PI that you've always wanted to work with and raising grant money to do that, or going to an organization that you believe in and forming relationships there. That's a way that Busara grows on the strength of the associate team that's able to bring in new energy and push us in different ways. So I'm really excited to see how the new associates that we bring in every 6 months or so are able to push in different ways.
Yeah, actually, and like with what Gideon was saying as well earlier in a question around how our projects allocated, it's not uncommon that an associate will come in, as Channing was saying, and will bring with them partners that they want to work with, very quickly put together a proposal and then be staffed on the project that they created for themselves. Busara is very, we're very, very open with working with different people who we're excited about, and just to say that there's a lot of opportunity for creating portfolios of research and advisory work as you come into the organization as well. A colleague of ours, Tom, who just joined recently, is very interested in conflict research, and he has been here for 4 months and has already written 3 proposals for 3 different conflict grants. And if once we get one of them, we're going to do it. So, and then that's going to be our conflict project that we've started doing through Tom. So anyway, just to say there's a lot of opportunity to do a lot of different stuff that would be in your own interest as well.
And just so, because we have Channing here, we can ask, someone asked earlier about how Busara collaborates with people in academia across the world.
Mm-hmm.
I think Channing would be a very great person to talk about this because he's coming from an academic background. He works at Princeton as a postdoc, and he will be able to provide us with that perspective better. So Channing, let's talk about that.
Yeah, so I think what probably every research implementation organization wants to be, but we really try to be a little bit firmer on, is we're not just a surveyor. We're explicitly not someone that someone would just give a complete instrument to, give all the details of. We're much more in the vein of what's the question that you're trying to answer and how can we work together to design an answer to that question. So we turn down research opportunities with academics all the time because it's simply a data collection exercise, and that's not where our expertise is best focused. So the way that I like to try to think about the relationships that we're building with academics are people from these institutions that have a very specific skill set, have interests that align with our approach to research, and have the capacity to engage us in a really meaningful way. So David works in a lot of lab projects with lots of different academics, but a very common theme is that the academics have a core general interest question that they want to answer, and they engage with us on how to best answer that. So we do a lot of contextual assessment. We do a lot of piloting and pre-piloting in the lab, honing in on even if they already know what treatments they want to run, we give them the tweaks, the specialization that they might not have, the contextualization that they might not have. So we think about building these long-term bonds with academics that really seek to pull on our expertise rather than just being some kind of data collection firm. So that's the way that we want to engage.
Thanks, Channing. So I think we're almost out of time. I think I'll leave this last part for Channing as well to just
I want this.
to basically summarize and just talk about what we're looking for in general in an associate.
Yeah, so I think that was covered really well by what you guys are saying, and I think think the associate, no one better to say what's necessary than the associates, right? Like, it's great to hear what you guys think about the role and what's important. And I would really largely agree with all of that. I think we're looking for people who are very intrinsically motivated by the opportunity as they see it. And that's a really important thing because it's impossible often to predict what the job is like. And in this particular case, the job is really what you're going to make it. You're going to come in, you're going to learn a lot. You might think that you have expertise in econometrics or experimental design. You'll quickly learn, even I have a PhD and I don't even know half this stuff, right? You quickly learn on the job, you learn new things, and I think what characterizes a really great associate is someone that has a lot of motivation to capitalize on the opportunity that this is, has a lot of drive, has humility to what they know and what they don't know, and is able to really push themselves to learn new things, and really is hungry to learn new things all the time. That's what's going to make a really, really great associate.
Great. So yeah, all right. Thank you, Channing. So I think we've come to the end of our webinar. So we answered all the questions that we had, and a few that had been coming in over the last 1 hour. But so we'll provide a recording of this session through the same link that you guys joined in. So you can, if you have any other questions, you can email me or anyone on the team. But there's an email provided there, and we'll be able to get back to you. So thank you very much for joining the session today, and we look forward to reading applications and talking to you. All right, thanks, guys.
Bye, guys. Thanks.
The 40-second delay is so
No.
Where is it?